Добрый день, дорогие друзья. Меня зовут...
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Angelina Davidova. I will act as your facilitator for today's event, and it's a pleasure to welcome all of you to the online forum called Responsible Futures, organized by the Education and Culture section of the UK Embassy, the Climate section of the UK Embassy. And this is part of the University Alliance program, which paves the way for further dialogue between Russian and UK universities. And for the next 3 hours, we are in for quite an interesting discussion. A number of speakers have been invited, and you will be able to address your questions to them and get questions, network with each other, share your contact information, and think about the possible responsible futures. This forum is going to be held both in English and in Russian. Simultaneous interpretation is available. Please make sure that you have selected the right language. At the bottom of your screen, at the control panel, you will find a globe icon, which is the interpretation icon. It's right next, well, this is the globe icon, like I said. Click on it and select the relevant language if you want to get simultaneous interpretation.
Warm welcome to today's forum. My name is Angelina Davidova, and I'm one of the moderators of today's event. And the Forum Responsible Future is indeed a very interesting two-day event, and it will take place and it will be moderated and organized in 2 languages simultaneously, and you'll have access to simultaneous translation. In order to access the simultaneous translation function, please find the interpretation button in your Zoom. If you're using Zoom as a program version, then in the bottom black bar, you'll see an interpretation sign behind the planet sign, and then you can choose any language you like. So if you need an interpretation into English, please choose the English channel. And we strongly encourage you to stay within the channel throughout the duration of the conference, so that the interpreters will be able to hear you and you'll be able to hear the interpreters. Thank you. Дорогие участники, еще раз добрый день.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angelina Davidova. I will be your facilitator. Like I said, this event is going to be held in 2 languages. If you have just joined us, let me just tell you once again that simultaneous interpretation is available at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Please find the globe icon and select the relevant language if you need simultaneous interpretation. This is it, and I hope that everything is working fine. If you run into any problems, technical glitches, simultaneous interpretation problems, let us know in the chat box, and we'll make sure that you get the assistance. We have a number of speakers invited, and they will address you during the next few hours. We hope that you will have lots of questions. Please use the Q&A section to address your questions to the speakers. We'll try to take them on air, because after each and every lecture or presentation, we have slated some time for the Q&A. So please write down your questions in the Q&A section. We will single out the best and forward them to our speakers. Another important thing is that we will send you a hyperlink to a feedback form at the end of the forum, and we would appreciate if you would fill in the feedback form. That will help us improve the upcoming forums. Your opinion is extremely valuable to us, and we want the content of our upcoming forums to be as interesting for you as possible. So this is day 1. We're going to have 2 sessions. The first session is going to be devoted to innovations for climate change. And both UK and Russian presenters are going to brief you on various innovations that are linked to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, climate adaptation issues, and we will be discussing things like responsible and sustainable land use, sustainable communities, renewables. And the second session of day 1 is going to be devoted to climate-related research and innovations of universities. And today we're going to give the floor to representatives of the Moscow State University named after Lomonosov. There will be quite a number of speakers, and most of them will discuss both communications technologies that can be used for climate management, the carbon sink potential of the Russian forests and their impact on the climate change, as well as the smart cities and sustainable development. As you can see, the topics are totally different. There is a broad range of issues that we plan to discuss. There are lots of speakers. The agenda is quite intensive. So I'd like to ask all the speakers to stick to the time schedule and the time slot allocated to you. And since it's not always easy to hear the moderator while you are presenting, please pay attention, because a minute before your time is up, I'm going to give you a warning signal. I'll just say out loud that you have 1 minute left. That will hopefully help us stay on time. Like I said, we have a total of 3 hours. This is not a lot, especially given the fact that we have a total of 2 sessions. There will be lots of questions, and I hope your presentations will provoke lively debate. And I hope that all the participants will find this forum interesting and mutually beneficial. I hope you will get more knowledge and establish new contacts with your counterparts. Without further ado, let's move on to our first session. And like I said, the first session is going to be devoted to innovations for climate change. And it's quite clear that climate change, on the one hand, is caused by a number of processes, including man-caused activities. Therefore, it's of utmost importance to discuss both the issue of reducing greenhouse gas emissions as well as technologies that help us do that. And on the other hand, it's important to discuss those innovations that help us adapt to the ongoing climate changes. And now I'd like to pass on the floor to Professor Carol Mondell, International Science Envoy at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Carol, I'm really sorry for this technical glitch.
Thank you, no problem, and it will give Dermot a chance to gather his thoughts. He looked a little stunned to be brought in first, so it'll give him some chance to gather his slides. Angelina, thank you very much for the opportunity. Colleagues, friends, distinguished guests, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to open today's Responsible Futures Forum, and also to say thank you to the British Council for the invitation to speak to you today, to them and the science and climate teams at the British Embassy in Moscow for all their work in helping us to strengthen UK-Russian dialogue and to collaborate on science and climate change. It's a particular personal pleasure for me to speak to you today. Back in 2019, I took my first visit to Russia ever, and I visited Moscow, and I brought a team of 14 university vice-chancellors to meet with Russia's top university rectors. And so again, we continue to build on those strong bilateral links between our two countries. And of course, the reason for this is more than just friendship and good science. Climate change is not a distant threat. The science clearly shows that we must act together today to accelerate action to reduce emissions, to protect our environment, and to adapt to the consequences that we are already seeing impacting all over our world. The United Nations Climate Conference, COP26, will be held in the UK in Glasgow in November of this year. It will be a pivotal moment for the world to come together and agree ambitious steps to prevent the catastrophic warming of our planet and to revitalise our surrounding habitats. The UK, as COP26 president, is committed to working with all countries to raise ambition for climate action. And through our presidency, we will champion a clean, inclusive and resilient recovery from the impacts of the devastating COVID-19 pandemic. As we continue to rebuild from this coronavirus pandemic, we have seen governments, business and civil society across the world uniting in their calls to place climate action at the forefront of economic recovery plans. We will work with governments and non-state actors to move to net zero and drive global progress in 5 key areas: energy, nature, adaptation and resilience, clean transport and green finance. Together, there is a great opportunity for progress in all of these areas in Russia. But climate change is not just an issue for action by governments and major businesses. It's an issue which impacts every one of us directly and which everyone can play their part in tackling. We will work with those affected by climate change and wider civil society to harness the innovation and commitment of all. The first half of today's forum is dedicated to the spirit of innovation, as Angelina eloquently introduced, from fuel cells and innovative battery technology to new approaches to sustainable heritage management and eco-friendly urban development. Underpinning all of these developments, of course, is science, and the focus of the second half of today's forum. Scientific research has a key role to play in understanding the challenge of climate change and informing the solutions to it, including both mitigation and adaptation. The impacts of climate change globally are very clear, and they're already particularly pronounced in the Arctic and subarctic areas. The Arctic has warmed by 2 degrees Celsius since 1850, around double the global average. It doesn't sound very much, but actually it's catastrophic, and we see those effects on a daily basis. International collaboration is crucial to help improve the understanding of the changing Arctic and the global implications of those changes in our interconnected planet. Fortunately, Arctic research is very much part of the wider scientific relationship between UK and Russia. It is deep and long-standing. It's a research area of both mutual interest and considerable expertise, and I'm very pleased to say that UK and Russian scientists are already productively working together in this field and producing world-leading, internationally impactful research. Over the past 3 years, the UK Science and Innovation Network in Russia, together with many partners, has worked to strengthen and significantly progress UK-Russia Arctic science links and practical collaborations. We have bilateral research networks, dynamical institutional partnerships involving leading universities and institutes on both sides, joint publications, as I say, and jointly conducted research projects and education. Later today, you'll hear presentations from a range of representatives from Moscow State University, which has been a key partner for a number of different scientific collaborations. Several of the presenters have been participants in the joint UK-Russian research projects, and I'm sure they'll provide a very positive demonstration of the benefits of all of this collaboration. And I personally hope there'll be many more opportunities for deepening our bilateral science cooperation in all areas, but particularly on climate change and in this pivotal year for our planet and on Arctic research during Russia's Arctic Council chairmanship, which again is a critical linchpin of moving the agenda forward. Today's event is a wonderful example of cooperation between our countries, across society, and also of the vast expertise that we have in both of our countries. So I'd like to thank all of you, the speakers, for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to the fascinating discussion, and I hope your work can spark further cooperation on these vital issues. And we look forward to build foundations for our common sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, let's now move on. I'm sorry once again for the technical mistake I made now. Let's move on to session 1 finally, and we're going to be discussing innovations for climate change. We'll be talking about climate change mitigation and adaptation to the ongoing consequences of the climate change. Now, I'm going to pass on the floor again to Dermot. Dermot, sorry again. I really apologize for that. The floor is all yours, and you can move on.
Thank you. It'll be even better a second time. Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to speak about the work of the National Trust for Scotland. The National Trust for Scotland, as I said, is Scotland's largest conservation charity. We have over 300,000 members, caring for over 100 heritage sites, including buildings, battlefields, gardens, forests, and mountains. And we have connections with Russia too. It's a pleasure speaking to the Russian audience. I've been struck in Russia before that we have this combination of flags. We have one part, you have the other part. Perhaps we should join them together. And we also have long-standing architectural connections. The architect Charles Cameron in the 18th century contributed to the development of Russian architecture, particularly the use of classical motifs. I want to talk to you today about another Scottish architect, Charles Rennie Mackintosh, and his wife Margaret MacDonald Mackintosh. He and his wife developed a distinctive style that combined traditional Scottish features with the international trends that became modernism. They were also strongly influenced by Japanese art and design. And their designs encompass both the exterior and the interior of buildings to create a total work of art. One of Mackintosh's most fully realised buildings is the Hill House in Helensborough, which is near Glasgow in the west of Scotland. This was built for the Blackie family, a famous publishing dynasty, as their family home in 1904. The Hill House is based around the lives of the Blackie family, and the design goes from the gardens and exterior through to the furniture and even the cutlery. And Mackintosh was drawing on Scottish traditions of fortified houses. These are quite common in Scotland. There was a lot of fighting in Scotland at one point, to create a dramatic exterior. He used the traditional Scottish harling, which is a coating of mortar to keep out the rain. It also rains a lot in Scotland. Crucially, he was making use of modern materials, particularly Portland cement. This was much stronger than the traditional lime-based mortars that were used in medieval castles, but it allowed for a more daring and experimental designs. Unfortunately, this modern design and the modern materials have proved to be less durable than more traditional buildings. The west of Scotland is wet. We have an average rainfall of 1,600 millimetres a year compared to 700 millimetres in Moscow. The National Trust for Scotland took over ownership of the Hill House in 1982. We realised there were problems with the building and started trying to make repairs, but with limited success. At that point, we were primarily injecting plastics, polymers into the cracks to see if that would stop the water ingress. Water was continued to penetrate the building and damaging the structure and the interiors. Climate change means that Scotland is expected to get even wetter, with both greater rainfall overall and more intense rainfall events. This map shows the trend from the 1960s onwards, and winter rainfall has doubled in some areas since the 1960s. And something to observe, it's not just rainfall falling down, but with higher winds, we get more lateral penetration of rain as well. The Hill House was built over 100 years ago when environmental conditions were drier. So we needed a more radical solution, and a decision was made to create a metal box to temporarily protect the house. We raised £1.5 million from members and donors to undertake the project, one of our largest fundraising campaigns, and the project itself will cost about £4.5 million overall. We designed an enclosure that would be independent of the house. The walls of the enclosure are made of a metal mesh that stops 90% of rain entering, but allows the building to breathe and for visitors to still see it from the house. The transparent shelter weighs some 165 tonnes, and the chainmail mesh weighs another 8 tonnes. It's going to take about 3 years for the building to dry out fully, and then for work to begin. The box is also designed to allow visitors to continue to enjoy the heritage. In fact, the box allows visitors to see the building in ways that were not possible before. We've now secured the building and stopped, for the moment, the damage caused by the rain. We plan to spend the next 10 years researching how best to adapt the building to these changing environmental conditions, and we hope to use these lessons in other buildings in our care. We will then remove the enclosure. This is intervention on a large scale, and it will not be possible for every building. But although the Hill House is unique, it does raise issues that affect the wider built environment. Had the Hill House been built with more traditional organic materials, we could have adapted it more easily, or at least replaced the damaged areas. But because it's a modern design, it's built to higher specifications, and the materials used are less flexible than their traditional counterparts. Adapting our built environment to a changing climate will become an increasing challenge, particularly where we want to maintain the form of buildings unchanged because of their historic or cultural significance. So to conclude, finally, as we develop ways to adapt our cultural heritage, we will also need to find the means to do so. The Hill House was first a family house, and it was then bought in the 1970s by an association of architects before it was acquired by the Trust. Neither of those groups were able to maintain the building in the condition that we'd like to see it in. It's taken the resources of a national charity to save the Hill House. To conserve our heritage in the face of the challenges of climate change, we will need to mobilise our national resources. One way this can be done is through national conservation charities, where communities can save the heritage that matters to them. And we also need to share our learning, and the National Trusts have established INTO, the International National Trusts Organisation to connect national trusts around the world. INTO will be bringing your shared experience of climate change conservation to COP26 in Glasgow in November 2021. Thank you, and I wish you an enjoyable conference, and back to Angelina.
Dermot, thank you so much for a very interesting presentation, and thank you for sharing us a specific case study to showcase how to properly adapt a heritage object, a heritage site to climate change. This is quite impressive, and I really hope that both myself and other participants in the forum will have a chance to take a look at the Hill House for themselves. Indeed, the global climate change poses a huge threat for heritage sites, and UNESCO, by the way, published a number of scientific papers that analyze the climatic risks to various heritage sites, and Russia is not an exception. And indeed, it was great that she demonstrated to us a specific project implemented in Scotland. And you were quite smart and flexible in trying to adapt the existing heritage site to the ongoing threats and future challenges. Thank you for sharing this unique and wonderful experience with us. This is a success story that paved the way for the rest of the session devoted to innovations. And thank you for sticking to the time. Actually, you were even shorter than expected. Let's move on. I'd like to pass on the floor to Jacqueline Gibson, Sustainability Advisor, Blenheim Palace. And the title of her presentation is The Role of Land Estates in Tackling the Climate Crisis. Jacqueline, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and a wonderful opportunity to speak to you all. So Blenheim Palace sits in the heart of Oxfordshire, a 12,000 acre estate. And for those who maybe don't know what happens there or much about the estate, this little video, I suppose, kind of paints a picture of the various activities, events that we have. So we welcome a number of visitors every year, up to 1 million visitors. This all has a toll, obviously, on the building itself. We have a number of events. It's a forestry team. We have 2,000 sheep on the estate. So the kind of farming industry is happening. It's the home to the Duke and his wife and family. They reside there 3-4 days a week. As you can understand, with Dermot speaking about the kind of the toll that the environmental conditions take on the building. There's a lot to keep the building open.
Jacqueline, I'm sorry, but there is an audio track in the video and it interferes with your voice and we can hardly hear you.
Okay. Apologies for that. Really just, I suppose, to paint the picture that it is a working estate. And it's forestry, farming. We have a number of events that all generate a lot of people coming to the palace, lots of waste, lots of energy needed to heat the building, to light the building. And obviously the biggest impact in terms of carbon are the visitors, the international travel of visitors coming to the estate. So, however, we do understand this idea of wanting to protect and conserve and preserve the environment as it was from over 300 years ago. And before the palace was actually there, it was the royal hunting ground for the king. So we have home to Britain's oldest oak tree. And really, very much at the forefront of our new marketing was all about this idea of future generations of sustainability really embedded into new branding. We came up then with our 10 goals, and one of the goals was really centered on carbon, and to become a net generator of renewable energy in 10 years. So this was 2017 when I started. So that meant that we obviously had to understand, well, what was our carbon footprint? What is our carbon footprint? Understanding the mapping out that baseline, reducing that with LED lighting. We've invested in 3/4 of the lighting now in the palace LED lights. We have a number of biomass boilers, and we do have a small hydro turbine on the estate as well, where we're able to do that, because as you can imagine, a listed building, UNESCO, it's very limited at what we can do with renewables on the actual building. And then we want to obviously generate renewable energy. So we'll have to do that off-site on our land, and then store it, put it into battery storage and bring it back and actually deploy it into the palace where it's needed. And we want to generate above and beyond that, actually we're exporting onto the grid and back to those local communities where we're serving. And then hopefully that's when we'll achieve our carbon gain. So we have very aspirational targets. Just last year in February, we declared our climate emergency. We decided to bring forward our vision from 2027 to 2025 to reach carbon neutrality. We wanted 50% of our visitors to arrive on sustainable transport, when you think maybe 80% were coming from China or America. And we wanted to reduce the energy consumption in the buildings by 25%. And that's not just the palace, but those are office buildings, forestry, barns, a water bottling plant, and also the homes on the estate. So we declared this last year. That meant that we had to then go out and think, well, how do we almost do this big mapping footprint? So we were measuring our energy. We'd gone to a green energy provider, but we then engaged with University of Oxford, the Environmental Change Institute, to really understand what, not just our scope 1 and 2, but really our scope 3 emissions as well, and using 2019, 2020 baseline around other things like our scope 3 around procurement, travel, food, the shop, the retail. What are those really big impacts? So this was recently launched, so it's pretty new. So we now then have a figure. We're able to see our carbon, for example, in terms of kilowatt hours, in financial value, and tons of CO2. We switched to a green energy provider. We've engaged with Bouygues, a French consultancy, to help us on our drive to implement renewable energies. And we also undertook the European Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, even though we didn't have to do that legally, it wasn't mandatory, but it really gave us an indication of recommendations and actions we could take. And as a result of that, we employed an energy manager as well to drive this down. So some of the actions we took, especially in terms of people arriving by sustainable transport, incentivizing a 30% discount. And we saw that this actually really increased the visitor numbers up to 30,000 from when we looked at 2017. We then joined this initiative, offered 30%, and just last January, before COVID, we offered this then to 50% discount, and we extended this to train, the bus, electric vehicle, or a bike. So if you arrived at the Palace, and if you think that's maybe £30 for a ticket, this was very attractive for people. We did have an old electric vehicle, one of the first in the UK on the estate. So we tried to be clever with our marketing when we launched then our new electric vehicles on the estate as well. So it's kind of learning from the past, thinking about where we want to go into the future. Again, those scope 3 emissions, trying to drive down food waste by initiatives such as Too Good To Go. So we now have mapping and reporting on energy, water, and carbon. And as you can see, even with the waste, we're diverting up to 93% away from landfill with just good waste management practices in the building, outside the building, with our visitors. So then we thought, let's look at our land again. Let's think of, okay, so we're trying to reduce our carbon, but can we do something with the land? And if you look over to the right, you see under the environmental column, this project Natural Balance. And we thought this is really going to help us to achieve that carbon neutrality. So after that assessment was carried out, we then undertook a further assessment, a natural capital assessment. And this was just hot off the press. This was just completed in December. And again, we're looking at all the range of ecosystems, from forestry, recreation, and actually for flood protection. So looking at the financial value and the financial assets of Blenheim being there, and us protecting those assets, those environmental assets. And then we're able then to restore the soil health. We're working with our tenant farmers. And this is just a little video actually that just happened last week. This is one of the scientists from the University of Oxford taking a soil sample. So we're able then to work with our tenant farmers, work on the land, and look at where can we put maybe more nitrates, where can we change the soil type that will absorb more carbon. So I just thought I'd share that with you. Obviously, there's not many people out on site, but just to give you a flavour of our bad weather there as well. So some of the key outcomes, we now have a figure where we have a carbon rating per visitor of 2.5 kilograms. We're trying to buy local. We've got a range of renewables there, waste recovery. And then with our conservation and biodiversity planting, really this land strategy, that's going to help us then achieve that being net positive carbon sequestration. So it's kind of like twofold. We had these kind of insights of where those big carbon impacts were, and now we've got this roadmap then to sequester and store carbon on our land, invest in renewable energy, and adopting nature-based solutions. So it's quite a nice time of year to spring into action and really paint that roadmap. And we really want to bring other landed estates with us right across England and work with the Department of Agriculture and the Environment as well. So collaboration is key. So it's thank you so much for being part of this, and it's great to take part. And I'll just leave you with this one that I was fortunate enough to attend last year in Moscow at the UN Global Compact. So I do welcome these opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for your wonderful presentation. I was very interested in learning about yet another specific case study to respond to the climate change and protect and conserve a heritage site, your palace. And it's great that you embraced a very comprehensive and integrated approach. And I really hope that your story would be useful for the Russian audience, because there are lots of experts amongst our audience. It's great that you calculated the greenhouse gas emissions and identified the sources. It's great that you started collaboration with the UK universities. It's important to engage various stakeholders involved in the climatic action. It's great that you try to embrace everything, including transportation, energy, food, land use, you name it. This is a wonderful project, and it was very useful and interesting. I personally believe that this is a great example, and I really hope that all the other speakers will follow suit. Guy Eames is our next presenter. He is Director of Planet 2030. The title of his presentation is Tools for Creating Sustainable Communities, One Planet Living in Tarusa. We had two examples, two case studies from the UK. Now we're going to move on to Tarusa. Guy, the floor is yours.
Angelina, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to the conference. Can you hear me? Good morning from, or actually good afternoon from sunny Russia. I'll try to add share my screen. I hope you can all see it now. Right, so I'm going to tell you, about a fantastic UK tool for sustainability, which we've tried out in Russia, and we're hoping to spread across the whole country and use in different towns, called One Planet Living. Now, maybe some of you have heard of One Planet Living. It's a very simple tool. Quite often when we talk about sustainability, it's difficult to explain the concept to younger people or to people who are not familiar with it. One Planet Living is very simple. We have one planet which we're living on, and we have resources from one planet. And if we continue as we are at the moment, where we're using the equivalent of 2 or 3 or even more planets, then obviously we'll run out of resources. So this is a concept which even small school children, 4 or 5 years old, can understand, and is the basis of the One Planet Living principle. One Planet Living principle was formed in Bedford in the south of London. And you can see here the Bedford community, which was, I think, the UK's first community of its kind, 120 apartments, people living very closely together in a community. The actual buildings themselves use very little energy, so they're low carbon. They have their own heating source in a centralized heating boiler. As you can see, they use solar panels for electricity, and the buildings themselves actually are very well insulated and use, as you can see, this solar penetration through the windows heats up the buildings. There are many also other social aspects here, which at another time we could go into, and many other innovations. So from Bedford, this tool was created by Paul and Desai, Bioregional, and you can see that it's a holistic tool for creating sustainable communities or sustainable programs, initiatives. And when I say that, you could use it for an individual or for a company or for a space. It's really a universal tool, which hits upon the various aspects that we can see on the screen. And each one of those has a knock-on effect on both carbon emissions and environmental capital, social capital in any situation. So I've been lucky enough to know Poran Desai, who you can see at the bottom right here, for many years, since visiting him in Bedstead probably over around 10 years ago. Poran is a neuroscientist, and I think he's one of UK's leading sustainability sort of pioneers, so I'm very fortunate to know him. We have traveled together not only to Russia on a number of occasions, but also to other nearby countries, to Kazakhstan and other places. And it was on his first visit to Tarusa when we started talking about actually implementing One Planet Living in Russia and looking for a place where we could actually try it out. So Tarusa is a town approximately 200 kilometers from Moscow. It's an artist community. There are a lot of really interesting people living there. And we most important of all in Tarusa, not only is it a wonderful place to do One Planet Living, to create this Russia's first eco town, but Svetlana Duving, who's on the bottom right hand corner, you can see also here, and in the picture on the top right, physically moved to Tarusa with her husband and family. She's also a sustainability pioneer in the country, and so together with her and Poran, and thanks to a grant from the British Embassy, we managed to launch the first One Planet Living program in Russia. The program consisted of the grant-supported part of it, consisted of taking various key stakeholders from Tarusa to visit the UK. And you can see here on the top left, Sergei Monakhov, who has since become the mayor of Tarusa, visiting Bedstead together with Alexander Andrianov. We held a workshop in Bedstead for the group. You can see Stu there, who's also a government advisor and a very famous UK sustainability pioneer. We visited Blenheim, so thanks very much to Jacqueline. She's also on the picture there, and other eco-tourist sites like the Lavender Fields, which is a fantastic example of eco-tourism in the UK. We then brought together various stakeholders, so-called stakeholders in Tarusa. We identified around 50 and organized events, including also people coming over to speak, and workshops. You can see here one of the workshops which uses the One Planet Living methodology. Basically, the group discusses each of the aspects, the problems and the solutions. We gather those together and we make a plan. And the plan then can be just go on paper, or it can actually be published online using a special tool. Here you can see various actions that we've put into this plan, which have been carried out. It's worth saying that the tool itself is really a coordination sort of vehicle. It's not a sort of centralized way of actually making everything happen, but it's certainly a way of speeding things up and organizing them. So you can see here, for example, local bread makers. We can see just actually last year at the left and at the top, public spaces, which despite COVID with social distancing were organized, and various other actions. You can see at the bottom how we're promoting Tarusa and the One Planet Living at a eco forum in Moscow at the end of last year, together with various other key leaders from across Russia in sustainability. And indeed, we've published the plan online. There's a wonderful tool, oneplanet.com. We've now published the plan online. And here's an example of the various actions. So within the plan, there is always an outcome which we're looking for. There's an action and there are indicators, and they're split up into the various categories that One Planet Living uses. This is just, as you can see, an example. You can actually go online and check out not only our plan, but also plans for various other towns and projects across the world. Ours was published in Russian because Russian is the main language, obviously, in Russia. And finally, we're getting quite good press about this. We've now managed to move on and get new both sponsors and grants from other sources to keep the program going. And you can see here a quote from Svetlana Doing, who is the local champion and leader, and from bioregional cities and local government leader Joe Pitts-Cunningham, as Tarusa is part of 6 different cities around the world which are linked together in this program. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope that it was an interesting contribution. Here are my contact details, details of my company, which is based in Peterborough in the UK. And over back to you, Angelina. Maybe you have some questions.
Thank you so much, Guy, for your presentation. Indeed, there will be some questions, but we're going to save them for the Q&A session, which is slated for right after all the presenters had a chance to speak and share their case studies with us. It's great that you told us about a specific joint UK-Russian project, which has been implemented in Russia. Indeed, this is a unique experience, and your experience is very interesting. Actually, I visited Tarusa before you started launching your project and implementing your projects there. And I really hope that in the near future, as soon as the lockdown is lifted, I'll be able to go there and take a closer look at all the changes, positive changes that are happening in Russia. Indeed, this is one of the pioneer projects for Russia. Thank you so much. Let's move on. And I'd like to pass on the floor to Stephen Davidson from Cambridge. So we're going to fly from Tarusa to Cambridge. Stephen is Deputy Director of Cambridge Zero, and the title of his presentation is Cambridge Zero, Harnessing the Breadth of the University Capabilities. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So yes, I'm Steve Davidson, Deputy Director of Cambridge Zero. I'm going to talk a little bit today about Cambridge Zero itself, and also about the COP26 Universities Network. Both of these are projects I've been closely involved with over the last year. Both bring together a community to maximize impact around climate change. So there are similarities between the two of them. So starting with Cambridge Zero, which is my day job. This was launched in November 2019 at a big event in London, attended by almost 300 people, so it's a great fanfare. It's led by Dr. Emily Shukra, who is a world-renowned climate scientist and communicator and my boss, and established with a grant from the University of Cambridge and a strategic grant from the Isaac Newton Trust. Its mission, which I've outlined there, is to maximize the university's contribution towards a zero carbon future by harnessing the full breadth of capabilities to help develop solutions. That's a bit of a mouthful. So the question is, what does that actually mean in practice? Before answering that, I think it's worth making a couple of points about the context in Cambridge. The first thing to say is that the University of Cambridge, even by university sector standards, is a very broad and devolved institution and a rich ecosystem. It's divided broadly into 6 schools, within which there are over 100 departments. In addition, there are non-school institutions, so lots of sort of galleries and museums. Then we have the 31 colleges, all of which are separate legal entities. And a lot of the governance happens at that kind of level. And so, you know, it's very diverse, and that devolution is our strength. The other thing to mention is that there was a lot of stuff taking place across Cambridge in the climate area already. And what I've included here is a list of some of the bodies at Cambridge involved in some way in climate research. The vast majority of these existed prior to the creation of Cambridge Zero, and it's not even an exhaustive list. Many of these had strong brands and identities and international partnerships, and were known outside of Cambridge and the UK. So I think the thing to emphasize is that a top-down approach was not going to be possible at Cambridge. We couldn't just bring together all of this activity that was taking place into one institution and create something completely new here. It was important that we built on our existing structure and strengths. So Cambridge Zero was therefore created as an umbrella initiative, which could sit above a lot of this climate activity. but also as a hub to coordinate and draw things together and scale things up where necessary, and as a gateway to act as a single point of entry into Cambridge on climate issue. And what this means in practice is that in effect there are two different Cambridge Zeros. There's the core team, these are the half a dozen or so facilitators, myself included, that form the Cambridge Zero office, plus various champions across the university who give up their time. And then there's the wider community, all the academics and educators working in this space. I should probably point out that picture is from last year's International Women's Day, which is probably the last time that most of the team were together in person, because most of our life has been quite virtual. So it's interesting to see that for me. Cambridge Zero has 4 pillars, and these kind of represent the breadth and depth of activity in this space. So there's the research pillar, and research, obviously, that's very much a driving force behind what we do. I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a second. We have the education bit, which, we support a wide range of courses, but I think the key thing to mention there is that it's not just about educating our own undergraduate and postgraduate students. We have a strong interest in a lifelong approach to learning. So it's how we engage at school level, before university, and professional education, also kind of leadership and development, that side of things. We have the engagement pillar, very important this year because part of the engagement pillar is about policy engagement, and of course COP26 is very much the top of our agenda, and the knowledge transfer, how we get our research out there, is very important. Industry engagement comes into that, as does sort of broader public engagement. And then we have decarbonisation, and this probably bears a bit more resemblance to some of the things that have been discussed already. It's about what we do with our own estate to reduce our footprint. We are an 800-year-old institution, so you could imagine that comes with all number of different challenges from a building perspective. So going into a little bit more detail on the research in particular, we organise our activity around 6 themes, the idea of which is that each of these themes can essentially have its own community within the broader community, and some of these are more developed than others. So for example, zero carbon energy transition's much more developed because there's already a strategic network within the university operating in this space, and that's around developing next generation power and heating systems, batteries, photovoltaics, turbine design, that kind of thing. Then we have health and society, less developed. It's partly about the behavioural change aspect of climate change, but also the impact of climate on the issues around public health or contagious diseases. Resources and productions, about circular economy and sustainable industry and agriculture. Resilient futures is quite an interesting one. That's how we build sustainability and climate risk assessment and adaptation measures into various policy and processes, particularly financial processes, and with an emphasis on applying artificial intelligence tools. I think transport, cities and infrastructure probably speaks for itself, as does carbon drawdown and climate repair, which is more focused on the kind of carbon capture and storage technology. So I think I've just skipped to, hang on a second, there we go. So that's it on the Cambridge Zero side of things. The other thing I'd like to talk about is the COP26 Universities Network. It was formed around about the same time as Cambridge Zero. And as I mentioned at the start, we're similarly sort of focused on how we bring together a community to increase impact. But in this case, the focus is less on Cambridge and much more on UK universities and academic institutions as a whole. It's very much a bottom-up initiative. Initially, it was just a few institutions who got together, founded on the premise that the UK academic sector it's a huge resource and has an enormous role to play in making COP, the big UN climate summit that was discussed earlier, a success. And it's quickly grown. Now there's more than 65 members, and it's still growing. It's almost entirely voluntary. It received a small amount of funding from UKRI and the research funding part of the UK government to support the Secretariat at Imperial, but everyone else pretty much gives up their time for free. In terms of goals, it has 3 goals, partly to ensure that UK academia plays a role in COP, also to provide access to evidence and expertise, which is obviously very important for role for universities, and finally using the networks and influence that universities have to help get the various players facing in the right direction. And it does this through a number of activities. You know, it helps in terms of sharing knowledge, building partnerships. It works with the government on sort of building education and skills and long-term perspective on skills around net zero into learning. You know, it's about showcasing entrepreneurship in this space. There's a strong communication aspect because, you know, it's about providing access to academic experts for media, and there's a public engagement element, sharing best practice there. Probably at the heart of a lot of what it does are these briefing notes. So these are various academics from across the network working together on targeted and strategic notes, presenting evidence on key issues. So, for example, on a green recovery from COVID, from a just transition, that sort of thing. The final point I want to make is that the big thing that the network has been working on at the moment is Climate Expo. And this is a big 5-day virtual conference taking part in May, hosted by the COP26 network in partnership with RUS, which is Italian University Network for Sustainable Development. It's a part of the official pre-COP programme. And the UK COP team in the Cabinet Office are closely involved with the organisation of this. It has 5 themes: green recovery, nature-based solutions, mitigation solutions, adaptation, resilience, and finance. And it's aimed at students, academics, and policymakers, but it's free and it's open to all. So please do come along to that. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for your presentation. It was of high interest to learn about the activities that the Cambridge University is engaged in to ensure zero carbon footprint. Approaches, priorities is something that you touched upon. And I was personally glad to hear about the university network, both in the UK and in Italy, that collaborate in organizing the COP26, which is to be held in Glasgow in November 2021. In Russia, the association of the so-called green universities has been in place for several years now in Russia. The achievements are not as great, but nevertheless, we see that this is that climate change is a popular topic. And when I address various audiences at Russian colleges, I always ask them, how can we organize our activities in such a way as to reduce the carbon footprint of at least our colleges? I will definitely share this information with the Russian counterparts. Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation. You will get questions later on during the Q&A. Let's move on. And I'd like to pass on the floor to Dr. Helen Smith, Senior Lecturer in Renewable Energy, Exeter University, and the title of her presentation is Renewable Energy at Exeter, a research-led education to develop the next generation of clean energy engineers. Helen, the floor is all yours.
Thanks very much, Angelina, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all today about renewable energy education at Exeter. I'll start off by giving you a brief introduction to both our talk programmes and our research, but I really want to focus on some case studies that highlight how our research is enhancing educational opportunities for our students. The benefits that this is bringing them as they enter the workplace as the people who are going to be really driving the industry forward over the coming decades. So some of you might not be aware of where Exeter actually is. We're in the far southwest of the UK. Our campus, where the Renewable Energy Group is based, is right down pretty much at the tip of the UK on the south coast of the county of Cornwall. We're overlooking the beautiful Falmouth Bay that you can see in the bottom picture there. And Cornwall is really a fantastic place for people to come to study renewable energy. It's the site of the UK's first wind farm. We've got extensive wind and solar deployments across the county. We've got 2 marine energy test sites. We've got deep geothermal investigation currently underway. We've got micro generation right across the county. So really for the students, everything is here on the doorstep. We launched our first renewable energy programme back in 2003, the first in the UK, and we've currently expanded to offer the 5 programmes that you can see on the screen there. And as a result, we've now got graduates working across the globe in all aspects of the industry, which is a fantastic outcome for us. On the research side, we've got world-leading experts in the areas that you can see here: offshore energy, solar, storage, environmental aspects, policy, electrical power systems. But our real research strengths lie in these 2 areas. Firstly, in offshore energy. So previously, this has focused more on wave and tidal energy, but more recently on the emerging floating offshore wind sector, which is where we're going to see huge advances over the next few years. Secondly, in solar energy, we've got experts working in novel building integrated systems and also the development of enhanced photovoltaic technology. So how do these research activities influence our teaching? Well, in the 3rd and 4th year of their programmes, all our students take specialist modules focusing on particular renewable technologies and supporting technologies, all of which are delivered by leading academics, researchers, industry experts who are actively working in these areas, who are working at the cutting edge, who can basically tell the students about what's going on in the industry right now and build that enthusiasm for the research environment. Leading on from this research strength means that we're also participating in a wide range of live research projects, giving students the opportunity to actively participate and contribute to real research. And alongside the academic research, a key part of our success comes from our links with industry, providing students with opportunities for internships or to work on specific industry challenges within their taught modules. So the picture you can see on the right-hand side there shows a group of our 4th year students installing a LiDAR system to measure wind speeds on the island of Guernsey and the Channel Islands as part of a collaboration with the Guernsey government's renewable energy team. And then finally, we build on real-world based scenarios in our assessment and our group work that's going to enable students to develop their transferable skills, to develop research skills in that type of environment. So the first case study example I wanted to present is looking at how this actually works in reality. So an example here is a new building integrated solar PV technology that was developed by researchers here at Exeter. It's called Solar Squared. It's currently being marketed through a spin-out company called Build Solar. Essentially, it's a transparent building block that integrates solar PV, and it can be used in new buildings, structures to create a transparent wall, but with generating capacity. And the development of this type of technology within our group allows students to get involved in the R&D process. They can get involved in the testing, developing applications, writing up research papers and so on. So the example presented here is a student dissertation project which took this technology and assessed it to look at its performance in hot climates, so in the tropics, and then moved on to investigate the potential to replace existing glass windows in Dubai metro stations with this particular technology. And this student produced a fantastic piece of research. It actually ended up winning a university-wide student research award. Other opportunities include the potential for students to get involved in live collaborative projects with external partners and to be able to see how these work firsthand. An example here is a project we're currently involved in called Intelligent Community Energy, or ICE, funded by the EU's Interreg funding scheme. It's an €8 million multi-partner, very interdisciplinary research project that's really about designing and implementing innovative energy solutions for isolated islands or territories. And Exeter's role in this is basically to develop the methodology and then to assess how it can be applied to various locations. So we've had 3 students involved in this type of work. Really, they're applying the skills that they've learned in their specialist modules in this live research. They've been performing resource assessments, they've been working collaboratively to develop energy scenarios for these islands, and they're contributing to the reporting on this work. So it really allows them to be part of a live project, to see how the project meetings work, to see how they can contribute their ideas, and to understand how research runs in the real environment. And then finally, I wanted to tell you about a course that we run at the end of the first 3 years of the programme. So it's a module that's entirely based on a field course centred on a consultancy style project, so working for a local stakeholder somewhere. And we tend to take the students to an island. We've gone to the Greek islands, Canary Islands, Channel Islands, working with local government or councils or charities to find solutions to energy challenges. So the students work with the stakeholders to research the issues, to develop the projects. They carry out on-site research, interviews, data collection, and so on. And then they're tasked with developing the solutions and reporting back, quite often in a kind of, public large meeting type environment, producing a detailed report as well, and giving them a real feel for how it is to work in a high pressure environment, the importance of planning, communication, and working under pressure. So we're continuing to develop these approaches because we really see how the graduates are benefiting from this. We feel that incorporating the research into our teaching in this way is giving the students a real sense of excitement about the possibilities. They really see how they can make a difference. It's preparing them for their future careers, whether they're going to move into the industry side of things or into the academic side of things. It's giving them the transferable skills that they need so that they can go on to become the future leaders in the low carbon clean energy industry. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions later.
Thank you so much, Helen. Indeed, it was a very interesting presentation as well, and I especially liked the fact that you focused on the practical case studies and the way you established the link between the researchers and the educational programs at your university. It's great that you dwelt on the career paths available to your grads, and it's great that you touched upon the very important link between the research projects and the educational programs. This is an approach which is currently embraced by most of the colleges, including Russian universities. On the one hand, lots of renewable programs are only being developed in Russia, but on the other hand, Russian universities and colleges are trying to penetrate the market and involve the various stakeholders, including potential employers, and they are trying to find a way to link the research projects and further careers for their grads. Thank you so much for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on. And now I'd like to pass on the floor to a number of speakers from Skoltech. And the very first presenter is going to be Keith Stevenson, Provost, Skoltech Center for Energy Science and Technology. And the title of his presentation is Energy Storage for a Sustainable Future. He will touch upon energy storage issues, which are of paramount importance, especially given the fact that we're on the threshold of the so-called energy transition. Russia, amongst other countries, pays more attention to renewables. Therefore, energy storage is indeed an issue for the entire energy sector. Keith, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate the opportunity to tell you about what's going on at this rising new graduate level university in Russia, Skoltech for short. It sits within an innovation ecosystem, Skolkovo. Guy had a nice photo of himself on the territory with a map of the whole background. But the idea here is that Skoltech is the flagship university that sits within this innovation. And the project really took off about 10 years ago, where they wanted to really redesign how you educate and train the next generation of scientists and engineers, and how you diversify between oil and gas within Russia. So here we organize Skoltech by a series of centers in specific target domains, for instance, in energy efficiency, of which in 2013, I was recruited to Skoltech to found a Center for Electrochemical Energy Storage, which is now the Center for Energy Storage and Technology, due to the fact that we integrated an energy systems program within this. Skoltech, I don't have the time to go into all the details, but it now has over 1,200 students and 150 faculty across 17 licensed and accredited graduate programs. So it's risen quite rapidly and already starting to make quite an impact. Of course, the problem that motivates everybody around the world is that we have a tremendous demand for energy. And if we keep relying on oil and gas investments to generate this energy, we will have many other coupled problems, such as the topic at hand here is the fact that we have huge amounts of greenhouse gases being emitted by different sectors. Russia really in the area of transportation, and agriculture generates a lot of CO2, as well as the other Northern Hemisphere countries. And the problem is that if we don't come up with some way of diversifying, especially bringing renewables into our energy infrastructure, we'll never be able to combat the problem of the CO2 emissions, nor will we be able to sustain a very comfortable way of living that we've all grown more accustomed to. It'll impact not only things like the temperature around the planet, but also just the ability to address some of the consequences of global warming. So there was a very nice report a few years ago put out by the UK, where they assessed different countries by vulnerability and the readiness. And you can see that UK and Russia and North America are much more equipped to deal with the consequences of climate change. Whereas in the Southern Hemisphere, there's very catastrophic predictions of what might happen just if the Earth continues to warm. And we start to see a lot of these catastrophic type events, ranging from forest fires to floods and other natural disasters. So again, the key problem is that in order to bring wind and solar and wave energy into an energy infrastructure, is that you need to be able to store the energy when it's demanded. But we can generate energy by these different renewables, but often it's mismatch and when the energy is really demanded. And the other thing is that when people design power plants, for instance, even with natural gas and coal, they try to design it for full capacity, but they never usually operate this at full capacity. And this represents a really bad problem. So recently with COVID, there was an analysis done with different countries around the world of how much energy they had to dump because of the decreased demand due to the fact that everyone was self-isolating, not going to about their normal day of business, not going to these large places of business and concentrated urban centers, for instance. And yet all this energy that was generated was just dumped. They'd had no place to store it because they didn't have sufficient storage options on this. The other problem that you might have heard about recently is in Texas, where they had a very big cold snap. And in Texas, they have their own grid. And unfortunately, the grid is outdated, but also it wasn't equipped to actually deliver over 34,000 megawatts of energy when it got cold and everybody turned on the heaters in their house. And so more than 5 million people went without heat for several days. And the funny thing is that some of the doubters of climate change and also some of the conservatives tried to blame it on the fact that the electric windmills that were installed in West Texas froze, when in fact it was really the natural gas peaker plants that weren't able to rise the capacity to meet the demand for everyone turning on their heating systems. So really what is going on, especially in the United States, is to transition how we use hydrogen within the energy infrastructure So not only to provide hydrogen as a way to address the bimodal transfer between the grid and, say, hydrogen used for other things like chemicals and other sources, but then the idea here would be to try to generate hydrogen without producing CO2. And that's really one of the holy grails. And in particular, the other thing that people noticed, especially in the United States, is that if we can actually make ammonia directly without having to go through this Haber-Bosch process, we can really lessen the CO2 footprint dramatically. And so some people now are starting to look at how we can use electricity generated by solar and wind to do electrolysis, i.e. electrochemistry, to convert nitrogen from the air directly to ammonia, or to generate hydrogen without CO2, to then use it in the source here, because the source of hydrogen right now comes from hydrocarbon. So if we could actually transition to this kind of scale, we could really do a lot to really solve some of the problems with regards to lessening the CO2 footprint. The other side of this, though, is any of these renewable technologies use a lot of expensive, non-earth abundant elements, and we are not recycling these elements. So it really provides serious supply chain constraints that if we do transition, say, to electric vehicles, we need to move away from cobalt. We need to find other cations such as sodium or potassium that are more earth abundant. And that's also true for things like hydrogen, where we use platinum catalysts. More than 95% of the supply of platinum is used just in the heterogeneous catalysis world to do chemical conversion between, say, hydrogen and other commodity chemicals like methanol. And then, of course, we want to also look at the whole chain. And so there's a nice report that came out of Australia, Alcoa, looked at these different competing technologies. And we at Skoltech have down selected 2 areas of interest, which will be presented primarily in the area of hydrogen fuel cells and redox flow batteries. But we also have efforts with regards to storage where we use sodium-based materials. And that may be really useful because, in particular, the current lithium-ion technology is not really safe at all for installation in any condensed urban areas because of the reactivity of cobalt and the limited supply of cobalt. It's just too cost ineffective and too unsafe. So when we structured the center, the energy storage is a multi-dimensional problem for how much energy you want to store and for how long. So there isn't just one type of electrochemical device. You either want to store long-term energy in the form of chemicals like hydrogen or methanol, or you want to use soluble precursors that can be dissolved in very concentrated electrolytes and then use kind of a semi-battery type technology to convert those fuels into electricity when needed. So we focus at many different levels of this problem, starting from even computational design all the way up to applied testing and measurement on energy smart grids and so forth. Of course, I am limited for time, but the other thing about Skoltech is it really integrates this education, training, and research part. Everything is integrated. There's no compartmentalization of our coursework with, say, our research laboratories. And in particular, the focus is to generate from the lab bench scalable technologies that can be transitioned into innovation. And Skoltech has done a fine job. In our center, we've nucleated 4 startup companies, one in the area of non-cobalt containing cathodes for advanced lithium-ion batteries, and others beyond lithium, such as potassium-ion batteries, this K+ company nucleated by former graduate students of Skoltech. And so I'll just show you the reason why you'd like to get rid of the cobalt is that it's not earth abundant. It's primarily mined in Congo in very socially irresponsible ways that then have a very large carbon footprint. So we by design in Russia wanted to focus on things like vanadium or manganese or nickel based materials because it's all of these performance advantages are gained by getting away from things like cobalt and lithium due to the supply. And the other thing is we'd like to also get rid of the transition metals because they're also not so good. They are very heavy in nature. So we tried to make batteries consisting only of oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen. And these have some advantages in terms of the lightweightness and the ability to really do high rate charge storage and over very fast cycling. And so for certain applications, this might be very good for urban areas with some type of hybrid-based storage, where we have, say, the skin of a building or something that can actually store energy that's generated from solar or wind. So with that, I will stop here, and I will introduce the next student here. So we have two case studies of research that they're currently undergoing at Skoltech. Third year PhD student Elena Romadina will talk about the advantages of redox flow batteries, in particular organic redox flow batteries. Elena.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kit. And I want to start my presentation. Can you switch to the next slide, please? Yeah, I want to start my presentation from the lithium-ion technology because it is most popular technology of the batteries nowadays. And let's consider a little bit closer the structure of the lithium-ion battery. It consists of the two electrodes, cathode and anode, and two electrode materials. One material is located near the anode, and the second one is located to the cathode. During the charge or discharge of the battery, the lithium ions migrates from the one material to other, creating the electric current, which are powered some device, which can be powered by such a battery. The main advantages of the lithium-ion batteries is the high energy density and the high cell voltage. The cell voltage is around 3.6 volts. The next one. Since our discussion today is dedicated to the large energy storage, the main aspect which I want to emphasize is the scalability of the batteries. And the problem of the scalability of lithium-ion batteries can be very well seen on this picture of the battery park in the Tesla car. So the battery park on the Tesla car is created from the modules, and the modules consist of a small lithium-ion batteries, which are a little bit larger than the classical AA battery. So such a way, it is not a way how the large amounts of energy can be stored. So what could be done in this thing? The next one. We can move forward to the other type of the battery, the Radex flow battery. Here we are having more or less the same construction of the electrochemical cell. We also have two current collectors, two electrodes and membrane between them. However, in this case, the redox active material is not stored inside of the electrochemical cell. It is dissolved in the liquid electrolytes, and the liquid electrolytes are stored in two tanks. One is catalyte tank, it's blue, and another one is analyte, it's yellow here. And these solutions are pumped through the electrochemical cell. Why this construction is so important? This construction provides us the possibility to more or less unlimited upscaling of this battery. We can upscale only the volume of the electrolytes and not upscale the electrochemical cell. The next slide, please. The most well-known technology today is the all-vanadium Radex flow battery. You can see some pictures of already commercialized and already used setups. One is in Japan and another one in Germany, and some other Radex flow battery setups are located in China, US. And what is the main clue? Why all-vanadium Radex flow battery are the most important technology now? The clue is in the electrochemical process which is going inside. In these batteries, vanadium derivatives are used as an Radex active species for both sizes, for the cathode and for the anode size. And such a unique combination provides us the opportunity to neglect the most important drawback of the inorganic Radex flow batteries, the crossover of the active species through the membrane. So it's more or less neglected because vanadium atoms, the same electrochemical element, is used on the both sizes. However, there are a number of other drawbacks of this technology. First of all, it's the temperature control which is required because vanadium oxide precipitates at high temperatures. And of course, it's the safety issues because here the strong acetic solutions are used, and vanadium, it is the heavy metal, and it is not also very safe material. The next slide. Nowadays, researchers are working to improve the Radex flow battery technology, and the main step here is the transition from the inorganic materials to the organic ones. Of course, some inorganic materials, for example, iron, is extremely cheap. However, inorganic Radex flow batteries have some drawbacks, as I already mentioned, the cross-chemical crossover, the low energy density, and some other issues, especially the safety, due to the heavy metals which are used, due to the concentrated sulfuric acid, which is also used, bromine solution, and other stuff. Organic chemistry can provide us the great possibility to create highly soluble and highly stable molecules by the combination of the different parts of the molecules. Some molecules you can see on the slide, they can be conceptually separated into two parts. One part is a core structure of the molecule. This is responsible for the electrochemical reaction. And the other part is the tail of the molecule, which is mostly responsible for the solubility. So the combination of these two parts and some other substituents can allow researchers to create stable and highly soluble components, which can be soluble not only in water-based solvents, but also in the organic solvents. And this is a very important thing. The next slide, please. Because the transition from the water-based solvents to the organic solvents can provide us with opportunity to create batteries with very high potentials, up to 5 volts, and increase the energy density of such batteries. Here in Skoltech, we are working on the novel components for Radex flow battery. For example, we developed a novel catalyte components based on the fluorilamine system, and the novel analyte components based on the phenazine systems. Both of them are really nicely soluble in polar organic solvents like an acetonitrile. And the system were evaluated in our laboratory prototype of the Radex flow battery. The photo of it you can see on the slide. You can see the electrochemical cell on the top, the wheels which place like reservoirs, tubes which are connecting the reservoirs and the electrochemical cell, and the peristaltic pump which pumps the solution through from the wheels to the electrochemical cells and back. As a result, we get very nice stability of the battery for more than 50 cycles. And I don't want to go into some deep details of this research, but you can find out our recent publications on that, and I'm ready to answer your questions. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I want to introduce the next speaker who will continue this presentation and tell us a little bit more about hydrogen fuel cells. So Kirill Kurdin, PhD student of Skoltech, please.
Yes, thanks, Elena, for a very kind introduction. So we'll see how hydrogen and fuel cells power the future. So hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and its use in some energy generation facilities is wise and actual for now. So in this universe, we now have a constellation of a hydrogen console of many car and motorbikes manufacturers like Toyota, BMW Group, Kawasaki, Hyundai, and also, of course, the catalyst producers like Johnson Matthey. They are all now in hydrogen console, and so it gives us a core of this hydrogen production and the market. And so Hydrogen Council also estimates by 2050 the increase of global hydrogen market up to 16 terawatt hours per 2050. Yes, for now, like 5 years ago, it was all captive hydrogen, just used for production of methanol or ammonia, but the hydrogen for like a renewable will be used by 2050 and will be like 18% of the global energy consumption. Next slide. So when you produce a hydrogen, the best way to store it in salt deposits, it's like salt caverns. And the first ever salt cavern was made in United Kingdom, by the way, in this site in the northeast England. And so the salt deposits are mainly Permian there, but it could be also Mesozoic in another part of England. And the vast majority of salt caverns are located in Germany. They like take 24% of their natural gas within, and Germany is also now deploying the other salt caverns to store hydrogen within them. And also there are some large caverns within the United States in Texas, like Clemens Dome and Moss Bluff. And so they could store like in the volume of 500,000 cubic meters and in the depths of 500 to 1,500 meters. So it's a very cost-effective and safe method to store the hydrogen. And so it has a negligible leakage. Next slide, please. So, and this stored hydrogen then used for the hydrogen vehicles. So we have a miracle. In July 2020, we have Hyperion XP1, which is the first ever hydrogen fuel cell supercar. It's just refilled with hydrogen within 3 to 5 minutes, and it goes with one refill for 1,600 miles per hour just for 2 seconds, like a supercar. And also, as I said, Toyota and Hyundai have their other cars. So Toyota Mirai revealed their in 2014, and Hyundai Nexa is also a commercial product. And also there are the drones and some kind of small helicopters, which are also now used hydrogen to go. So the fuel cell market speeds up, and it's a great time to talk about it. And so what is the fuel cell? So this is an electrochemical generator which uses hydrogen in the anode side and the oxygen in the cathode side. So you could see the membrane electrode assembly of the fuel cell. So when hydrogen goes to platinum catalyst on the anode, it faces platinum and converts to protons. Electricity goes to the external circuit, and protons face reduced oxygen, and we have water as a byproduct. So ecologically benign, very well. And so proton exchange membrane, as I said, are commercialized with some cars, but still this production of electrolytic hydrogen from water splitting is expensive, like takes $8–9 per kilogram of hydrogen. And so there are also some solutions besides hydrogen. In low temperature fuel cells, they trying to use direct methanol fuel cells. It has also high energy density. For instance, like for proton exchange membrane, it's 800 watt hours per kilogram, and for methanol, it's 1300, even more. But it's a pity it's restricted in Russia. And so the catalyst stability is not well for this catalyst, and the proton exchange membrane fuel cells are the best one for now. So next slide, thank you. So as I said, green hydrogen made by electrolytic water splitting is too expensive. And if we use another type of hydrogen, which is gray, made by steam methane reforming, it has carbon emission and it doesn't fit within this decarbonization company. And so it's captive to be used for the production of other chemicals. So we propose to use the blue hydrogen with carbon capture and storage system, which is cheaper, like gray hydrogen $1 per kilogram, blue one $1.8. So, and this system is cheaper than green, but still, if we have some kind of this purification, we still have some traces of CO, carbon monoxide, and which is in quantity of 100 ppm parts per million. It's already a strong poisoning. What do I mean under poisoning? It's when these CO molecules go to platinum atoms on the anode, and they make like a shield from hydrogen to go to platinum and to be converted to protons, and so you get zero power, zero electricity. So and you'll see now our like sub branches of the case studies, which is devoted to protection of platinum from CO poisoning. Next slide. So one of some sub branches is like economical analysis of several synthesis methods. As you see, the catalyst, like in the component cost breakdown, like for 500,000 units per year, catalyst takes 41% of this whole cost. So we need to study this catalyst and to know how to defend them from CO poisoning. And many studies which are devoted to it, they are all cost effective. So we are now dealing with understanding the real cost effectiveness of these methods. And also our drivers are also like US Department of Energy, which are showing us that besides CO tolerance, we also need to decrease the platinum loading. And by 2025, we'll save up more platinum with it. And so some synthesis methods like polyol and microemulsion, yeah, they are more cost effective, but have some organics, but get great polyol synthesis with a small molecule. So next slide. Our another sub branch is CO tolerant protectors with electrolysis deposition, and it's very cheap and use no organics. Next slide. And so you could see very fancy pictures of this catalyst. We can see the core shell structure and some animation. You could see some composites here that we synthesized and already published. Yeah, some of the even Eiffel Tower within this slides. Next slide. And so to conclude how we study CO tolerance, this like in science, it's a 3-electrode experiment when you have some CO poison and then you strip it, like remove it from the surface, and we made very extremely CO tolerant catalysts, which gets out of the CO in the low potentials. And also for R&D, we checked it within 100 ppm CO poisoning, and so we have less than 10% of decreasing of power characteristics. So yeah, that's what we published. And so thank you. I want to conclude everything. So this is our team. So you'll see like this is Skoltek, Keith, Lena, me, and the other scientists. We are all working on these renewable energy sources, and we are glad to answer your questions. Contact us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keith, Yelena, and Kirill, and the other presenters for interesting presentations and lectures. Indeed, it's quite clear that you focus on future energy work streams. And for Russia, these issues come as novelty. And that's why it's great to see that there are some case studies that are being implemented in Russia thanks to the international effort. Thank you for sharing that with us. Right, ladies and gentlemen, it's high time we moved on to the Q&A session. We received some of the questions in the Q&A section. Some of them were sent to us directly, and some were addressed to us before the conference actually started. Let me just read out some of the questions, if you want to volunteer to take them, you are more than welcome to do that. Question 1, I guess, should probably go to the very first 2 speakers. So it is as follows: museums and responsible futures. How do we shape the right agenda, and what do we start with to ensure green development, decarbonization, and CO2 footprint reduction? Jacqueline or Dermot, who wants to take the floor first? Jacqueline, I see that you have raised your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a great opportunity for visitor attractions where people come to them to really talk about and actually educate people in sustainability, and really use that opportunity as in the creative industry to trial and pilot different. I mean, it's a very challenging sector because a lot of the buildings are old. You can't put in double glazing or renewable windows. So to build a new sustainable building, it can be quite easy enough, but the challenge is these old buildings. So even within Blenheim, we have little sensors. We're working with technology from the university to track humidity. If it's a bad day, of people coming in with their rucksacks or their jackets, and maybe the impact that this has on the exhibits, on the paintings, the tapestries, but also then on terms of energy, because you need more humidifiers, more air conditioning, more heat. So it's quite interesting if you can attract the right people with the toys around innovations that they can use these spaces to trial and pilot and talk about these exhibits. So it's part of the experience when people come to these historical buildings.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Dermot, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I think the more famous heritage buildings can be a kind of leader for some of this, but we've got a lot of traditional buildings. I mean, Britain's unusual. I think about almost 50% of buildings are older than 1980. So we've got a lot of kind of traditional buildings that are designed to breathe. So there's a lot of airflow to keep out damp. But for energy efficiency, we need to reduce airflow. So we need to work out how to do that without compromising the building's health or the health of the people that live in it, that you don't want to create more damp situations for people. So we've got a big technical effort to find a cost-effective way of adapting existing buildings in order to meet our climate change goals. So the heritage sector can lead on that, but we'll have to find a way to kind of mainstream it so it can be used right across society.
Thank you so much indeed. I believe that this is a great idea to use heritage objects as a testing ground for developing practical solutions that could be scaled up to cover other buildings and areas and sites. Thank you so much. I guess the next question might be addressed to all of the presenters, and it goes like this. What do you think are the jobs of the future, and where do we study for them, both in the UK colleges and Russian colleges? Any volunteers? Go ahead. Well, I can definitely say that one of the jobs of the future would be sustainability engineering and well, I attended the master's degree program in Dartmouth, Leicester, and I highly recommend this e-course on sustainability to all of you. It is devoted to sustainable development and e-climate change. Sustainable engineering is a great program. Thank you so much. Helen, Stephen, anything else to add to that on the jobs of the future? Go ahead. Helen, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Just following on from what Guy was mentioning, one of the reasons we originally set up the degree program here at Exeter was because of the demand from industry. And I think it's what we keep hearing from our industry partners, that they're just crying out for graduates with the right skills. And I think, you know, the universities are beginning to recognize this. We're seeing more and more of these programs being developed, and with different focuses as well. You know, clearly there's a need for engineers to develop the technological solutions, but there's also the need for the policy experts, for the sustainability and so on. And I think the more that the universities can work with industry to understand the needs, to understand the people that they're looking for, you know, the more we can do to, you know, help produce the people that are going to make the difference in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your response. Stephen, go ahead, and then Keith, you will have the floor.
I mean, I agree with both Guy and Helen. And one of the things I would emphasize, though, is the importance of skills, but not being too prescriptive with something like this. It's very hard to predict, actually, how technology will develop and what the world will look like in 10, 25 years. So it's about creating an education that allows people to adapt within a kind of core skill set as well.
Yes, and to follow up on that, really by design, we have to really figure out new mechanisms for how we educate and train the next generation of scientists and engineers, in particular, especially for Russia, as it will start to build markets and companies associated with renewables. Right now, a lot of it has, prior to the sanctions, was just imported, and they didn't really have the technical base even to install or utilize or distribute these sorts of renewable type solutions that exist already somewhere else. But in order to really adopt them, we need local people who understand a lot of the technical details, but also are, as Stephen said, that are very adaptable, because things change so quickly that they need to be able to address many different skill sets, right? And how they integrate, say, some of these smart technologies into urban centers, or working with both suppliers and other industries that might build these batteries, for instance. And so Schooltech has positioned itself kind of to be part of a national think tank when people come to us to try how to help educate, especially Russian industry, as to the solutions that could exist. And then also we have our students that are involved quite heavily, so they understand the real issues that might be asked of them to help solve.
Thank you so much for your responses. Let's move on to the next question, and I guess it will probably be addressed to Dermot and Jacqueline. It goes like this: what do you think should be the role of the gardens and architectural sites in the environmentally safe projects of the future? What kind of future projects can be tested at the existing gardens and other sites? Jacqueline, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, it's interesting. Even within Blenheim, we have, you know, manicured gardens and the public spaces, and as a bit of a monoculture. And then we have, you know, some of Europe's oldest ancient oak woodland, and we screen that off for members of the public, just because of, you know, this debate between damage but also education. So it's very interesting with these big landed estates that you can kind of look at what is the biological, what is the, I suppose, the value. And that's probably the sort of conversations we're having at the moment with Blenheim as a result of this report are around our tenant farmers and the landed estate around and about Blenheim. It's not just for the visitor attraction, but actually could we start almost using that rather than renting it huge areas, but actually maybe smaller acreage sizes. Can we rent that out to the members of the local community for ancient grain, ancient crops, for sustainable food? So thinking about wider sustainability uses, and obviously to improve the soil health. So that's a big thing that we're looking at, is the health of the soil and its ability to store and capture carbon. So I think having these reports done, it's forcing us to have a conversation that potentially years ago with the landscape architect, that it would have all been maybe the rolling hills. So Blenheim's architecture has changed, depicting on whatever monarchy was ruling. It had a dike system when it was the Holland, and then when the Germanic dynasty took over, it was all these rolling hills and big lakes. So we want to shape, well, what does the landscape of the future look like that's resilient to climate change, with flood prevention and the rivers coming through for the wider Oxfordshire. So we are partnering with the Waterways Network. So I think we are doing those things. And I think perhaps in the past we were maybe just stifled by one person's own taste. So I think there's a lot more freedom now, and there's a lot of responsibility and accountability that is placed upon these landed estates to really give back to the communities.
Kermit, go ahead, but I just wanted to add that there is another question, sub-question. What projects could be implemented in national parks? If you could please take that question as well.
Okay, I'd echo that. I would say that my experience of the gardening community is they are quite creative. They like change, they like a challenge, they like to evolve. So the aesthetic is always changing, but definitely there's more sustainability. For us, it's particularly around water, because we're going to see too much water sometimes, not enough water other times. So that's going to change practices in terms of the species that get planted, how we store water. And another big change is in peat soils, which traditionally we've used a lot in gardens, and that's both, heritage gardens, but also domestic gardens, people's own gardens. We have to move away from that because that's an important store of carbon. So the inputs into gardening are changing. Another part of climate change is species. So some species are prospering or benefiting, other species are being affected by it. So we have to change what we plant in gardens. And with that comes biosecurity. So we've now got new pests, new diseases coming in, which requires greater management. So these are all issues that we're working with. But I'd say the experience of heritage gardening then translates into urban green space. Is increasingly important in terms of people's health. So the lessons we learn in our large professionally run gardens can then be translated into domestic gardens and parks. So the same with greater and greater use of that in terms of people's well-being, but they need to be made more sustainable in terms of the inputs and things like water usage, peat usage, and the types of species that in 20, 30 years are going to most benefit from a changed climate.
And if I could maybe come in there as well, that this idea of social well-being. So we're working on a project called NHS, Natural Health Service, with the Eden Project in Cornwall, to really, in terms of social prescribing. So if people are suffering mental health or they need to do physical exercise, they can actually get a free pass into Blenheim. So it's very changing the very model that, an expensive, a rich kind of person that could go in and pay, and now we're really tackling those in society that need that exposure, need exercise, and even around to rewilding, as Dermot said. And we're looking at bringing back the beavers back to Blenheim in terms of the watercourse system. So we'll see how that goes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jacqueline. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a question in the chat box, and it says as follows. So we've been discussing the prospects and the positive aspects of reducing CO2 emissions and the environmentally safe energy development. However, we tend to ignore some negative consequences of oil and gas consumption reduction. If we reduce the oil and gas consumption, then the oil and gas prices will go down. Therefore, it will be much more profitable to start producing plastic out of crude oil and gas rather than recycle existing plastic. What do you think about the negative consequences of reducing fossil fuel use? Any comments on that? Guy, go ahead.
Well, this is really is a problem for us all, because the cheaper that oil becomes, the more expensive renewables are. It's difficult to compete. I think that oil is a long-term resource which we're going to use for over many generations for making both pharmaceuticals, for really using in a really clever way, and not burning as we are at the moment, or not making single-use plastic. So that's my quick answer to that one. But it's a difficult question. It really is a difficult question. And there are some conspiracy theories that the cheaper it gets and the more that they pump out, then the more difficult it's going to be for us who are supporting sustainability to be able to complete the energy transition.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Go ahead.
Yeah, interesting. The UK government are bringing out new legislation next year from 2022, where they will be penalising businesses on plastic packaging, unless it has a recycled content. I think up to 30% recycled content it has to have. So actually at the market price at the moment, recycled plastic is selling at £1,500 a tonne. And virgin plastic is selling at £1,000 a tonne. And actually there's more of a demand for the recycle it. I mean, big companies like Coca-Cola and the big bottling companies, they're buying all this up. So there's actually a shortage at the moment for this recycled plastic in the UK. So, and of course that's driven by legislation. So you can see sometimes it's going to be policy, it's going to be legislation that drive these things, but businesses are willing to pay more, even though it's from recycled.
Yes, Helen, go ahead.
And I think there's also the role for education in there. I think increasingly you see the younger generation come through, and the more the focus is on the sustainability, reducing use of plastics, clean seas, clean beaches and so on, almost in the next generation, particularly down here in the southwest UK, we see such a huge focus on, clean beaches. Schools get involved in these sorts of projects. The kids go down to the beach, they, do litter picks and so on. I think we're really beginning to see a sea change in how people think about this. And as, this next generation progresses through and becomes, moves into these companies, become decision makers themselves, it is about more than just the cost, and I think it follows on from, the legislation and so on. It is going to become a kind of a behavioural thing as well. And I think we're absolutely moving in the right direction.
Thank you so much. Helen, Keith, go ahead.
Yeah, the question is about plastics, but I think it should be known that the current way that we make plastic is by hydrocarbon cracking to make naphtha that then is reduced, and to produce ethylene. Ethylene is the feedstock chemical that goes into making all major forms of plastic. And this is a very large carbon footprint, very energy intensive footprint. And very, very few people favor the recycling thing because it also requires lots of energy to recycle plastics. So one approach has been to electrochemically reduce CO2, right, from carbon capture into ethylene directly. And this is a very actually active area of research, especially in the US, where they now have produced quite a bit of C1 and C2 type compounds directly from reduction of CO2. And this again, it's not going to, the price of oil is not going to dictate really how much plastic you make. It's really this issue of the carbon footprint and how do you reduce this carbon footprint? Because if you don't reduce the carbon footprint on any of these major industries, you'll still never be able to address this climate change problem.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for your answers. And the last but not the least question is as follows. I was just wondering, how did you incentivize tourists in the UK to act more environmentally, in a more environmental conscious way? How do we follow suit in Russia? How do we make sure that tourists do not throw garbage around and embrace environmentally safe practices? Go ahead, Dermot.
I'd say as the overall picture, it's difficult to ask a single visitor to change how a society works. So if the society is very car-based, asking them to somehow find a way to not use the cars is difficult. So the responsibility, I think, is on the host country to ensure that the infrastructure is sustainable as far as possible. But in terms of individual behaviour, I think a lot is to do with sort of nudging behaviour. So thinking about where you put a rubbish bin so that people don't have to look for one that's just there to hand, make sure it's emptied regularly. We have this kind of broken window theory that if someone sees a broken window, they think this place isn't looked after, I can just do something else. So if you can maintain the quality of a place, it sends a signal to visitors that to treat it with respect. And I think that's our challenge in managing our sites, particularly wild open sites, to keep them as tidy as possible so that visitors come and think, well, this is looked after, this is cared for, I should behave responsibly too. So I think the main responsibility is with the host country to create an environment that people can behave responsibly in.
Yeah, and I know at Blenheim Palace we have a visitor charter. We want them to behave sustainably while they're here, but also educate them on sustainability. But we just call it a responsible visitor charter. And it's literally, on the back door of a toilet, so, or, on the corridors. So at least if, maybe this is the first time they've maybe read something in the UK on sustainability. A lot of the visitors that come to Blenheim, for example, they go to London, Blenheim Palace and Bicester Village, which is a designer shopping outlet. So sometimes very kind of wealthy, high-end tourists from Asia. And we think, right, let's hit them with a message in their own language, in Mandarin, in Arabic, in Korean, and even the bins that we have recycling, making sure they're clearly signed in all those languages as well. So, but it's a challenge. It definitely is a challenge, and it's trying to help people understand how do you become responsible. Other parts of Europe, they don't seem to have issues. Maybe Germany with antisocial behaviour or vandalism that we're still struggling with in the UK.
Thank you so much, and indeed, I really appreciate a detailed description of what works and what doesn't work in your case. I believe that such personal experience, first-hand experience, is extremely useful for our audience. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that in the Q&A, we have, in the chat box, we have a comment, the essence of which is that all the presentations were very useful, and it's really necessary to realize that heritage objects and heritage sites are the venues which could be used for testing various sustainable solutions, various technologies, including managerial techniques, engineering solutions, social solutions, ways to deal with visitors, local communities, and so on and so forth. Land use solutions could be another example, and shaping the entire ecosystems. Thank you so much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. Session 1 is almost over. I'd like to personally thank the organizers as well as all of the presenters of session 1. Thank you for very interesting presentations. Indeed, you raised a number of important issues and stated some of the striking ideas. Thank you for sharing with us your experience and follow-up plans. I'd like to thank the audience for being active in asking questions. Let's move on to session 2. And I'd like to ask all the speakers of session 2 to switch their cameras on. Let me remind you that session 2 will be devoted to climate-related research and innovations pursued by the Moscow State University. And in the next 1 hour and 20 minutes, we're going to give the floor to experts from different walks of life. And we're going to start with Ivan Zasursky, PhD, MD, head of New Media and Communications Theory Studies Department in the School of Journalism. The title of his presentation is The Role of Communications in Climate Control. Ivan, the floor is yours. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to see all of you at this online forum. Indeed, the success story that I wanted to share with you will focus on the communications campaign that we organized jointly with Angelina. So it was not a project pursued alone by the Moscow State University. It was done jointly with the St. Pete State University. And I believe that it was a success story. Climate change issues are the challenge that we should tackle jointly. Let me make sure that I'm using the Russian language channel. I don't have that much time, so for starters, I just wanted to share with you why I believe that we need to engage not just in the research work to solve the climate change problems, but we also need to have the right communications technologies. The matter is that in any country, business, politicians, and all the other stakeholders try to focus on the public opinion. Unfortunately, we won't be able to achieve anything unless the society shares our concerns. And in this regard, there is a huge difference between people who speak English, who can get engaged in international discussions, climate experts, mass media, journalists who focus on climate change, just like Angelina does. Unfortunately, they are very few in Russia. At least their number is not sufficient. And one of the key challenges that we all face, and this is a problem that we plan to tackle at the Moscow State University, is to train the so-called communicators who would push the climate change agenda forward. If I may, I'd like to brief you on the platform that we developed. It is called Climate Science, and we developed it jointly with the Web of Science. I don't know whether my PPT stack has been displayed on the screen. Well, we don't see your PPT stack for the time being. Well, don't worry about that. The main idea is that I am also part of the Human Rights Council of the Russian president, and once we managed to deliver, we promised to deliver a presentation on climate change, and the Russian president agreed to that. We started looking for scientists and academics in Russia who would focus on that. We started looking for an editor-in-chief, and the only person I managed to find was Angelina. That speaks tons of good things for Angelina, but that doesn't speak tons of good for Russia in general, which means that there is a definite shortage of experts on climate change in Russia. There are very few people who really understand what is happening in terms of climate change. Thank you for sharing my PPT stack with everyone else. This is the database. And the green transition is the title of our report. Actually, it's an ebook. We're gonna upload the English version on our website. It has already been translated into English, but it has to be fine-tuned yet. So our English-speaking counterparts will be able to read this report. to come up with a high quality report, which you cannot just ignore, we decided to use the open source research platforms, including our platform. Please scroll down the screen. So we basically received publications from academics and scientists. All of them were in Russian, and they focused on the most important aspects of climate change. These are quite large articles that we included into our report. Most of these publications were abbreviated before they were included, though, of course, some of them were written specially for the green transition report. The next report that we plan to develop is going to be devoted to climate change adaptation. However, this is not the end of the story. Scroll down the screen, please. And as is clear, there is a section called the knowledge bank, or the database. We did it jointly with the Web of Science. And they partnered up with us because they share our concerns revolving around methane. Well, the very first publication is devoted to the methane budget. And the Web of Science really liked our approach. They liked the fact that we pin our hopes on the researchers and that we bet on the open science. So basically, they helped us establish the largest database on articles indexed by the Web of Science. 77,000 articles is, well, the precise figure is 77,587 articles. And we try to translate all of these publications into Russian with the help of a machine learning algorithm. Actually, I believe that this is one of our huge achievements. Not only do we demonstrate that indexed articles could be part of a library, please scroll down the screen even further. Well, it's clear that anyone can register to use our platform. For instance, Alexander Serebritsky submitted 2 publications. Natalia also submitted 2 publications. This is just an example. What we are trying to achieve is develop a knowledge-generating machine based on scientific researches, and that will basically allow us to double-check any referenced data, read the original article, and basically that's half of the articles indexed by the Web of Science that we have in our database. Jointly with Angelina, we discussed a feasibility of making all of these authors contributing editors so that they could openly discuss some of the publications. And if we are able to complete this project by the end of the year, which I'm not sure about, we might come up with a co-authorship mechanism. For instance, anyone could add something to your article, and you can make this person a co-author. That's going to be a win-win for everyone. So I just wanted to use this example to demonstrate the importance of communications. But for this attempt to develop this open source platform, please scroll up to the very top, because as far as I understand, most of the people in the audience are Russian speaking. I just wanted to show you the title of our report and thank Angelina once again, because her efforts were of utmost importance. She's a pundit on all these issues, and everyone trusted each other when they used our platform. No one expected any tricks on our part. We just published this info on an open platform, and this is something that we keep on doing. I really hope that this project will be developed and advanced. We plan to develop a joint master's program with the New York State University. And by the way, I already informed Mr. Kirienko about that. Nowadays, joint international projects raise lots of suspicions, but we will develop a climate and communications master's program so that our grads could have both communications skills, environmental skills, and they could discern between the various types of scientific publications. On the other hand, they could act as mediators in private companies, public bodies, scientific communities, and they could also act as editors for other scientific publications. Only in that case will we see an explosive growth of various communications efforts. To this effect, we need to have as many experts as possible and to have as many publications in the open space as possible. We can no longer afford being skeptical. We can no longer ignore these issues. We have to be clear on the fact that these are existential issues, and we will only be able to survive if we conserve our planet. Thank you for your attention. It was a pleasure to deliver this presentation. I really hope that you will deep dive into our project. Help us promote this communications platform. Double check our publications. Make sure that they're precise. We would appreciate any of your efforts and try to contribute to it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ivan, for your presentation. Stay tuned until the end of the session. Quite a number of questions will be addressed to you, and I hope that you will be able to take some of them that are already been submitted in the Q&A section and the chat box. Let's move on. I'd like to pass on the floor to Olga Titubalina, leading researcher, Lab of Aerospace Methods. The title of her presentation is The Impact of Russian Forests Directing to Climate Change, a Remote Sensing Analysis. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to address this audience. Some of the info that I will state right now was something that I covered during the climate change conference, but the emphasis will be different. The previous speaker was right in point now that we need to realize the importance of climate change, and we need to use an integrated approach because climate change affects everything, not just forests. Just some common fact. The Arctic amplification is a phenomenon showing that the temperature in the Arctic is increasing faster than anywhere else in the world. And suffice to say that we now have great tools such satellite images that we have been getting from Terra Aqua since the year of 2000. On a daily basis, we get updated info. But of course, and the processing tools are getting better all the time. On the one hand, we see that the forest borders move up to the north, and the temperature incrementally increases, especially in summertime. Of course, that has various effects on forests. These are the outcomes of a joint UK-Russian research project on the multi-platform remote sensing of the impact of the climate change on Russian boreal forests. Remote sensing means that we're using satellite images primarily, as well as UAV or drone images. We use a multi-scale approach. We use satellite images from the MODIS satellites to cover the entire Russian territory. The Leaf Area Index, or LAI for short, as well as the growing stock volume are the two parameters that we use. These national maps can be double-checked and they can be scaled. Let me share with you some of the outcomes. We compared the Leaf Area Index trends. This is, by the way, the weekly map of these trends. It just shows several, 8 to be precise examples, the 27th of May, the 10th of June, and so on and so forth. So basically, we compared the LAI trend data with the cumulative temperature data. If the temperatures exceeded 5 degrees, then the correlation was quite obvious. Ultimately, it turned out that the highest growing stock volume trend was observed in spring. And the same holds true for the Leaf Area Index. When snow melts until the 17th of June, the growing stock index was the highest. So basically that shows that the growing stock volume increased because of higher spring temperatures. However, if we deep dive into some key areas, it turns out that the situation is more complicated. For instance, let's zoom in on the Norilsk region. And Norilsk hosts the largest nickel producer that emits 2 million sulfur dioxide, 2 million tons of sulfur dioxide per annum, and this is a huge amount. Because of these emissions, they experience acid rains, and no plants are growing in the area whatsoever. This map shows the area of the affected forests. This is the way they look. Some of the shrubs can survive while trees cannot. Nevertheless, we used the Google Earth Engine to process Landsat satellite images that were shot from 1985 until 2019. More than 500 images were shot during that time, and the most obvious trends are shown in the areas where the forests are growing back because of the favorable climatic conditions. However, if we zoom in even further to identify even standalone trees, it turns out that most of the greenery growing back are shrubs and grasses. As for trees, well, partially they can grow back, but we have yet to identify this trend. For instance, we haven't seen any large trees during field trips. However, the most sustainable grasses and shrubs grow back. The growing stock volume the NDVI index is shown here. It has been increasing gradually from 1985 until 2019. This is the maximum NDVI. Very similar data was published for other ecosystems such as tundra. The NDVI is analyzed here from the year 2000 until 2016, both in Russia, Alaska, and Canada. what we see is a dominating positive trend of and it correlates with the summer warming trends. In other words, both in tundra and in forests, the temperatures increase, and that results in growing stock volume increase. Let's take a look at a synthesized map of Russia and Eurasia. Shown in green are the coniferous forests. We can get rid of the cloud cover to better understand the increase of the growing stock volume. It turns out that in Russia, the situation is quite stable, though there are some areas with an incremental increase of the growing stock volume. If there was some tree felling or forest fires, naturally the growing stock volume is lower. And last but not least, summer warming results in a greater number of forest fires. Naturally, forest fires negatively affect the growing volume. For instance, in 2020, in summer 2020, Russia experienced some of the largest forest fires that resulted in huge emissions of CO2. It was very hot in summer, and peat bog fires became a problem, and last season the forest fires were extremely destructive, and they deteriorated the quality of the atmosphere in the area, which posed additional challenges in terms of ensuring the quality of life for the local communities, and it also resulted in more intense ice melting. Olga, you have 1 minute left. On the one hand, what we see is that the greenery is moving towards the north. On the other hand, forest fires and tree felling efforts is the opposing trend. Satellite images can be used for monitoring all of these activities and summing up. However, I do not have precise data on forest fires, but I get an impression that growing stock volume will not offset the damage done by forest fires and burnt out areas. We need to closely monitor and properly manage the forests to strike the balance. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much, Olga, for sharing your results with us. Thank you for sharing with us an in-depth analysis on what is happening in the Russian forests in terms of climate change. And indeed, this is important not just for the Russian experts, but also for the international community. The international community pays close attention to what is happening in the Russian forests, because they belong not just to Russia, but to the entire global community. Let's move on, and I'd like to pass on the floor to our next presenter, and that's Professor Vladimir Tikhonov, PhD, Department of Geography of the World Economy. The title of his presentation is Sustainable Development of Smart Cities During Climate Change. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to address this audience. My presentation will be devoted to a slightly different topic because I was asked to speak about smart cities. I came up with a relevant PPT stack. So let me start by saying that this is a very popular topic, and it has been actively discussed by mass media. And smart is the buzzword that we hear all the time: smartwatch, smartphone, smart houses with remote temperature control. By the way, this is a very interesting system. Remote plant watering systems are part of the smart home concept. I once took a plane operated by the smart Avia by the Smart Avia air carrier. Smart traffic lights is what we see all across the cities. Smart tours. AI systems help you choose the right route or the guide depending on your wishes. A guide could be selected depending on who the target audience is: school kids, architectural college students. Facial recognition systems are being used in the subway, in the tube, or various systems are used to facilitate election campaigns for during municipal elections, and a number of well, I seem to be having problems with advancing my slides. Well, Vladimir, as far as I know, it's the organizers who are sharing their screen with your presentation, so just let them know when to advance your slides. Right now, there are lots of projects aimed at evaluating the quality of life, and the views of local residents are taken into account. And all other things being equal, some of the parameters might be perceived in different ways, and the range could be totally different. Some people might find it unacceptable to live in a city, while others would believe that it's quite comfortable. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We did a project focusing on the climatic conditions, and it turned out that it was necessary to set up a whole climate change monitoring system that would predefine the urban development strategy. Our research showed that we would need to use brand new technologies, cutting edge technologies such as big data. Time-proven IT modeling technologies could be used for modeling buildings, and in real scale, geoinformation systems could be used to this effect. Ultimately, that helps us create smart city solutions, as well as properly organize various events involving mass media. As for the global level, well, we cannot ignore the sustainable development goals. There is every indication to demonstrate that they're closely linked. The UN developed sustainable development goals to be implemented until 2030, and SDG 11 is called Sustainable Cities and Communities. And smart cities is a concept which is part and parcel of this SDG. The next few slides are devoted to some of the official documents, just to prove to you that not only definitions are being developed, but also KPIs that could be used as indicators for assessing the progress. This is a set of KPIs that we used for social and economic assessment. Smart development equals sustainable development. This is something that we have proven time and again. As for the specifications that we use. Social, economic, and environmental indices overlap, and this is shown in the slide to demonstrate what is more developed and what is not developed. The gray area in the middle is the overlap zone. I just wanted to show you a couple of examples to better demonstrate to you what I'm talking about. This is the map of the world, and that just goes to show you that virtual and augmented reality technologies could be used for visualizing your point when you talk to the wide public. For instance, anamorphosis maps, area maps, linear diagrams could be used as visualization aids. Well, let me just focus on linear anamorphosis examples. For instance, if you're asked how far do you live from university, you usually give it in terms of time. You say you're 20 minutes away, but on maps we use miles or kilometers. But nevertheless, we should use the time measurement because this is exactly what we're interested in. If I want to take a look at the population size and its dynamics, this is what happens. These are just two examples. I can deep dive into the population size of China and India. They grow exponentially. The Russian population shrinks. That's for the year of 1950. China is no longer growing. India is growing while the European population is shrinking. And this is the forecast developed by the UN back in the 1950s. It is showing that the European population is shrinking. The Russian population will shrink back to the polar region. Now let's compare it with the GDP, the population size versus GDP. Naturally, the situation is totally different. The US is the global money bag, and Japan looks like a fat pig as well. And the precision of this map is 0.2%. And well, the UK is shown in this map as well. It's in monetary terms, it's larger than China. And even China and Taiwan combined. North Korea versus South Korea, a very impressive image, all other things being equal. And Africa is just a small portion of the world map, especially if we exclude South Africa and Tunisia. I touched upon just some of the aspects pertaining to sustainable development at different levels. But of course, there are lots of other important and interesting ideas that we would be happy to implement jointly with our UK counterparts. Thank you so much for your attention, and sorry for the technical glitches. Thank you, Vladimir, for your presentation. Thank you for sharing with us the global view on the subject matter and the national situation on the ground. Thank you for comparing different countries with the help of the new mapping techniques, it's always useful to visualize some of the ongoing trends that we see in urban development, especially sustainable urban development. Let's move on. I'd like to pass on the floor to Vladimir Ivanov, Department of Oceanology. The title of his presentation is New Mechanisms of Arctic Amplification Triggered by the Sea Ice Loss. Thank you, Angelina. Let me share my screen. Yes, please do that. We can see your PPT stack on our screens. Great. Well, I don't want to waste your time, so my slides are going to be in English, but I'll be speaking Russian. And I'll try to simplify as much as possible the main messages that I want to drive home. Right. As far as the climate change is concerned, we cannot but discuss the Arctic for a very simple reason, because the most significant climate changes have been registered in the Arctic, and they primarily pertain to the sea ice. The so-called Arctic amplification has already been mentioned here. These two simplified diagrams clearly show what the essence of Arctic amplification is. The temperature increase in the Arctic is almost 2.5-fold greater than the average temperature increase anywhere else in the world. And the main reason for that is the feedback loop. Let me explain what I mean by the feedback loop. The matter is that if a force results in certain deviations that augment the force, then what you get is the positive feedback loop, and vice versa. If the consequences reduce the external force, then it's the negative feedback loop. So right now we are aware of quite a number of such feedback loops. Some of them are more important, some of them are less important, but the main idea that I want to drive home to the audience is that the Arctic sea ice loss that we are currently witnessing has resulted in new positive feedback loops that have never been the case given the normal climate conditions. And by normal climate conditions, I mean a normal volume of sea ice in the Arctic. And I'm going to discuss two of them with you. One of them is called the so-called seasonal memory, and the second one is called Atlantification. I will brief you on them very quickly, if I may. However, before I do that, let me just inform you on what is happening with the Arctic sea ice. After the year of 2000, the area of sea ice shrunk considerably, and currently it has reached a plateau, but overall it's 22% smaller than the level in the 1980s. Ice melts at the end of the summer season, which is shown in the temporal diagrams, and up until 2020, we've witnessed the following: the ice border, ice edge in the Atlantic, in the Arctic, shrunk back to the 85th degree of the northern latitude. It has never been the case, and the main cause are the anomalies. Just a number of simplified diagrams to explain the consequences of the climate change on the hydrology in the upper layers. The diagram shown on top is the sea ice anomalies in the Laptev Sea. The Loptiv Sea is the sea which is the furthest away from the Atlantic Ocean warming impact. But even in the Loptiv Sea, the changes are quite obvious. And the consequences are as follows. First and foremost, the ice-free season is longer. This diagram shows the duration of ice-free season in days. For up to 3 months, we have no ice in the Loptiv Sea, which increases the surface layer water temperature. And that means that the sun radiation warms up the surface layers even further. So the hypothesis could be as follows. Does the accumulation of excess heat in the upper mixed layer under conditions of long-term existence of open water in the summer season lead to a decrease in ice thickness? Let me explain what I mean. Ice is not gonna form until you surpass the freezing point, which means that this excess heat should go back to the atmosphere. That takes time. That means that the ice formation is delayed. And the question mark is not put there by chance, because it might impact the properties of the ice at the end of the winter season. In other words, is it going to be thinner? If it is, then that's your positive feedback loop. Thinner ice means that it will melt faster next summer. It will break faster, which means that the next ice-free season is going to be even longer. Just to demonstrate what I'm talking about, this is a map of one of the expeditions that I led back in 2018. The star shown here is up there in the north. This is where we saw drifting ice all the time. However, in the last few years, what we saw is an obvious seasonal signal showing that ice started melting in the summer at a greater speed. This is the Kara Sea images for 1996. Violet is the freezing temperature in summer, and this is the current situation. The warming is very intensive, which shows that it has a huge impact on the ice thickness. This is an image for 2020. It clearly shows the warmed up area in the seas and the ice border. And of course, until this heat dissipates, no ice will form in these areas. This is a satellite image, the 1st of November for 2018, 19, and 2020. And the difference is quite obvious. In early November, everything was iced over in 2019, while in 2020, we see a totally ice-free area, which means that the heat accumulated during summer did not dissipate, and it affects the properties of the ice cover. And I hope I have 3 more minutes because I have to go over the next hypothesis. Right, so the warm layer discovered by Nansen back in the past in the Atlantic had no impact on the ice, but now it heavily impacts the ice melting process in the western Nansen Basin and the Barents Sea. Everything is highlighted in blue, which means that the ice anomalies are quite widespread. And our expedition registered the data to prove the hypothesis. Yet another image showing that even in the Loptiv Sea, the warm layer started approaching the surface layers, thus affecting the ice cover. This slide just shows the mechanism of the so-called vertical convection. I'm going to skip it. and the main conclusions are as follows. Reduction of the Arctic sea ice became a trigger mechanism that intensified the positive feedback loop, thus intensifying the ice melting process. There are two main mechanisms. Like I said, the first one is called Atlantification. The second one is seasonal memory. According to the IPCC climate scenarios, the warming is observed in the Arctic, and that is proved by all the models. So basically, this process is quite intensive, and no one is clear on whether we will be able to slow it down. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Vladimir, for sharing the outcomes of your projects with us. Thank you for that. Indeed, it sounds serious, and it seems to me that some global processes are happening in the Arctic, and we cannot but be concerned about all of that. Thank you for sharing the outcomes of your researchers with the audience. The last presenter will also focus on the Arctic research. I'd like to pass on the floor to Professor Galina Surkova, Department of Meteorology and Climatology. The title of her presentation is Facing Hydrometeorological Extreme Events in the Arctic and Global Climate Change. Galina, you have the floor. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. To follow up on the Arctic topic, I'd like to brief you on the extreme hydrometeorological events that we study at the Moscow State University Department of Geography. And I was asked to brief you on the most recent developments in this domain. I will partially touch upon them because, unfortunately, I am unable to give you a comprehensive list of all of our projects within the 10 minutes that were allocated to me. This is the work done by the Department of Meteorology, Oceanology, and Hydrology. Just to clarify what I mean exactly by the climate extremes, the IPCC came up with the following definition. The occurrence of a value of a weather or climate variable above or below a threshold parameter. This is what we mean by climate extreme events. Just to demonstrate that we've been focusing on that for many years on that, I decided to list some of the international and domestic projects that the Department of Geography has been implementing. As is clear from the titles, some of them are directly linked with hydrometeorology. And the Arctic is a very complex ecosystem. Therefore, the consequences of the climate change could present themselves in different ways. This is a busy slide, I do understand that, but some of the keywords will probably sound familiar to you. Mapping experts help us visualize all the consequences in the maps. Biogeography, economic geography experts or other disciplines are engaged in assessing the Arctic climate change. So why Arctic? Why is it at the forefront of the studies done by the scientific community? On the one hand, Arctic is a unique territory. It has been less affected by man-caused factors in the past, but now it has been affected to a larger extent. It hosts multiple mineral resources. It is a source of fish, oil and gas, minerals, and the so-called aggregates production. Well, I guess geologists would know what I'm talking about. The Northeast Passage and the Northwest Passage are two other important things that I need to focus. The previous speaker mentioned that the ice melts. Let me share the following story with you. When I met with a Chinese shipbuilding company, the very first question that the Chinese asked was, what do we do to warm up the northern passage so that everyone can sail there? And since China is responsible for the largest share of greenhouse emissions, that was ridiculous to hear from them, that question. I guess they increased their greenhouse gas emissions. The chart on top shows the Arctic sea ice extent standardized anomalies. And at the bottom of the slide, what you see is the annual mean surface area temperature anomaly. This is something that we cannot ignore. The concept which is currently being discussed by the scientific community is the one that was developed within the past 10 years. This is an excerpt from a report, a special report on managing the risks of extreme events and disasters to advance climate change adaptation. This is a well-known diagram. Shown at the bullseye is the disaster risk circle. In other words, these are the risks stemming from various disasters. Shown on the left-hand side are the climatic aspects such as natural variability, which we cannot control, and the man-caused climate change. Shown on the right-hand side is what we can manage as humankind. In other words, disaster risk management. And the three lobes read vulnerability, exposure, and weather and climate events. And that heavily impacts the climate change in general. As for the work done at the Faculty of Geography, we do monitoring expeditions carried out by both undergrads and the faculty, and such large-scale expeditions are done jointly with international counterparts, and they are sponsored by the Russian Hydromet Agency. We analyze raw data. We do computer-aided modeling, which is one of the main techniques to do climate forecasts in the Arctic. And educational programs is what we offer to undergrads, PhD students, and naturally, our academics take a close part in that. So, like I said, we have a total of 3 faculties: hydrology, oceanology, and meteorology. As for the hydrology faculty, they study the data that was acquired in the past 2 to 3 years. They analyzed the data during desk-based reviews or directly during expeditions to identify extreme processes in the Russian extreme north. This map shows the route of the expedition that we carried out. The extreme hydrological processes are listed here. They include floods, hazardous ice events, erosion of the Arctic coast, snow avalanches, and these are just hydrology risks. I did not even mention cryolithology. That includes greater depth of melting, the reduction of the permafrost. We also analyzed the incremental temperature increase in the Arctic, highlighted in red are the areas which are the most challenging, highlighted in green, are the stable zones. Hydrology experts also focused on ice jams as a factor of river floods, and our undergrads and faculty members carried out a number of expeditions and mapped the most hazardous regions in terms of ice jams. They are shown by red dots on the map at the top of the slide. And these outcomes have been published. They're available to everyone. Another important thing to consider are the ice crossings. And since the iced over seasons are becoming shorter and ice melts faster in riverbeds, the winter river crossings are no longer available for local residents, and there are no bridges there. Therefore, ice starts breaking much earlier in the year. Therefore, even in the winter, hazardous events can occur because of higher average annual temperatures. These dots show the locations where we studied the current trends. And at the bottom of the screen, in the right bottom corner, you have a map showing the dynamics of iced over period duration. If the temperature increases by 4.5 degrees per annum, it's going to be a real problem. Shipping food products to the northern areas, we mapped the main routes following the river beds in the Arctic regions. And this map clearly shows that the navigation period duration changes. The riverbeds themselves can get eroded because of the higher annual temperatures and the shorter ice over periods. Floods can affect this process. So this is the data that was published back in 2020. In other words, it's quite recent. You can get additional information at the relevant websites. We do lots of work in the northern seas belonging to the Russian Arctic zone, as was mentioned by Vladimir Ivanov. This slide shows the sea surges. It's a very hazardous event that has a negative impact on the coastline. And we analyzed the dynamics of sea surges over the years. For instance, this diagram shows the outcomes for the Barents and the Kara Sea broken down by seasons. And this is the simulation data. The oceanology faculty actively uses various models that help them simulate sea surges and forecast the frequency given the possible climate change and the possible scenarios. This is just an example for the Kara Sea. It just shows you the complexity. This is the grid that was used to calculate various ocean-related parameters. The dots on this grid are the locations for identifying the ocean properties. It could be refined. I mean, the scale could be refined. The grid could be refined as you approach the coastline. And of course, part of the river mouth could be simulated. That requires high computing power and much preparatory work, but we're quite proficient in that. Modeling the tides in the Kara Sea is something that we do. As is clear from this map, there are regional differences even within the framework of a single sea. Such maps are developed jointly with undergrads, and of course we try to engage them as well as PhD students. Yet another example of a storm surge in the Kara Sea. As is clear from this map, the regional differences are quite obvious, despite the fact that the Kara Sea is iced over during most of the year. Now, as far as the climate change is concerned, this is what my faculty is responsible for, my department, sorry, is responsible for. We are an active participant in the Intergovernmental Panel on the Climate Change, or IPCC for short. In the right bottom corner, you will find some of the scenarios. The red curve is the worst scenario by 2160 if the temperature increases by more than 5 degrees. We looked into various options focusing on the Arctic. This is the simplest scenario, I would say. The monthly temperature changes by the end of the century in July, January, and annual average. As is clear, the major changes will happen over the Arctic, over the sea surface of the Arctic. And regional differences could be observed in different seas. And this is especially true for those seas that are adjacent to the Pacific Ocean, right here where the Chukotka Peninsula is, adjacent to the Atlantic Ocean, the Greenland. Greenland is protected by the ice cover, and naturally it has its impact on the regional differences. As for the July differences, they are not as salient as for the annual average differences. That's the image shown on the right-hand side. It's quite clear that the Arctic amplification is going to be quite significant. In addition to that, we have evaluated not just the annual monthly and annual average annual temperatures, we also assessed various climatic changes parameters. For instance, the number of days when the daily temperature exceeds 0 degrees. As is clear from the slide, the number of such days will increase during the warming. Galina, sorry for interrupting you. You're almost out of time. You have 1 more minute. Fuel consumption changes over time. The number of days with near 0 temperature changes, precipitation changes, wind speed changes. It goes down on land but goes up offshore. And this is proven by a whole bunch of models. Climate projections show the Arctic amplification. In other words, wind speed could be high, and that could affect. And the educational part is something that I want to touch upon. The floating university, I'd like to advertise it to everyone. Our undergrads, PhD students, and the faculty took part in these expeditions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Galina. Well, ladies and gentlemen, all the speakers had a chance to address the audience. Quite a number of questions were sent to us in the Q&A section and in the chat box. And thank you, Olga, for sharing your comments. Some of them were answered. Let me just read out a question that was submitted to us, and I guess it could be addressed to any of you. The vital scientific researchers that you've been doing for many years, are very important. Do you think that the public is aware of the researchers you do? How well is it covered? And if it's not, what should be changed in this regard? This is a question that I'd like to pose to you. Could I be the first one to take the floor? Yes, go ahead, please. Well, our department and our faculty in general has for many years on end have observed the following. Well, mass media does not cover our work sufficiently. We need to step up our efforts. And in the past few years, our grads that, former grads that are now well-known scientists do their utmost to spread the word around and spread the scientific views on the climate change issue. In other words, we need to step up our efforts to inform the public in general. We need to make sure that scientists communicate with everyone. Sometimes we're misinterpreted or are misquoted. Therefore, it's worthwhile to be able to speak directly to the target audience. And I'd like to thank mass media for that opportunity. We have to keep up the work we do, and we definitely support any type of collaboration. And of course, journalists should seek consultations from real experts and pundits before they publish anything. Thank you so much. Vladimir, go ahead. Just a brief comment, if I may. I totally agree with what Galina had to say. Well, the only problem is that, first and foremost, much depends on the competence of a journalist and his being or her being conscientious in what he or she does. Sometimes after an interview, they would double or even triple check some of the statements of scientists. But oftentimes, unfortunately, what we see is that the information published on the internet is reposted by other mass media, and the data gets misinterpreted so much then it becomes hardly recognizable, and sometimes they refer to you as the original source, and you know, your hair stands on end because you are totally terrified of the way they mispresented the info that you initially shared with a journalist. Thank you so much. Vladimir, go ahead. Vladimir, your mic is on mute. This is a very interesting topic, and it's worth mentioning that meteorology grads, most of them work on TV as weather forecast anchors, and they try to explain the various mechanisms and processes taking place in the atmosphere. But on a more serious note, we also decided to take part in these efforts, and for 27 years on end, we've been organizing unusual conferences, so to speak, because some of them are organized in Russia and some of them are held abroad. And one of the ideas that the journalists came up with is to mediaize the sustainable development issue. It turns out that so many interests overlap that a single roundtable discussion would not be sufficient, and I guess permanent fora would have to be set up. In other words, this is a very popular topic. Whether the info is properly interpreted or misinterpreted, I guess you can track it down, especially if you have good relations with journalists. At least I believe that they drive the main message home to the target audience. Thank you. Thank you, Olga. Go ahead. Well, I totally agree with the previous speakers. Indeed, climate change is an issue that scientists should start. However, forest fires is an issue that everyone understands because it's very relevant. It's been discussed in the mass media. Unfortunately, managers do not take enough management. Forest fighting aviation and the resources should be allocated. We're still to be taken. I do understand that the governance mechanisms are very inert, but like I said, these are important things, and certain mechanisms should be used by the government to take action. Thank you so much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we're almost at the end of day one of our online conference, and I'd like to thank all of the presenters, both of session 1 and session 2, for finding the time to share your expertise, for being so energized, and for doing everything to inform the public about the work that you do. And this is what the last question was all about. Journalists, faculty members, public organization officials attended this conference, and these are all the stakeholders that we have to focus on. I really hope that you will find the info that you acquired today useful and share it with everyone else. That was the whole point of today's event. I would also like to thank our participants, our audience. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for asking so many questions. Thank you for sharing your comments. Stay in touch, and thank you for taking part in day 1. We'll be looking forward to welcoming you to day 2. The second day will be devoted to the to economic forecasting and governance policies for sustainable development. It will last from 1 p.m. until 3:30 p.m. Moscow time. You can use the same Zoom hyperlink to join the forum. In addition to that, we will email to you a hyperlink to the feedback form. Your feedback is important to us. We are looking forward to any of your comments to improve the content and the agenda of the upcoming forums. Let me officially wrap up day 1 of the conference. Thank you so much once again. Have a nice day, and see you tomorrow. Bye.